Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a financial advisor from Everest Wealth.
And hey, I'm Daisy. I'm a financial advisor from Everest Wealth.
Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Hello and welcome back to the Australian Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Kate Campbell, and today I am joined by two extremely qualified financial advisors, Alex and Daisy. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Kate. How you going?
Thanks for having us
really
again.
Well, thank you for coming into our studio today.
Yeah, excited to be here. Talk about some superannuation.
Yes, a topic that many people love. I don't know.
Some people might find it boring, but I think it's definitely an important topic.
Very important.
So I guess to get everybody on board, why should we all give a damn about our super?
Yeah, so your superannuation is generally going to be your largest asset or your second largest asset if you're somebody in your 20s, 30s or 40s. So that's sort of, I guess, the first reason why you should care, because it's going to be, normally a large amount of money to you, because obviously by default, for a number of years now, employers have to put money into it on your behalf, which will grow over time, which you can then access in your retirement. So the purpose of super, what's the whole point of it, is to effectively so you can self-fund your retirement. So the government, back in the 90s sort of saw this coming forward and went, look, us paying people a pension once they retire, we don't think this is going to be sustainable. So it was good they had that, that forethought, which was great. So they created superannuation and they made it mandatory. So your employer had to put contributions in. And they've been ramping up how much your employer has to put in as part of your salary the last couple of years, which again is a good thing. But effectively, sort of the crux of it is the purpose of it is to fund your retirement. So to make sure that when you finish working, you've got enough money that you can still, have some fun, keep a roof over your head, pay your bills, those sorts of things.
So basically giving you choices when you're older and you stop working.
Yeah, and they haven't trusted people to save for their own retirement, which I think is correct as well, because I think most people would struggle to do that. Genetically, we're not geared to be thinking 40, 50 years, in the future. We're largely thinking about, when am I getting my next coffee or where am I having lunch, that sort of stuff. So having this system in place, I think, is a really good thing, by default.
Well, I think if people had a choice and they could use that money right now to go on a holiday, or they could put it in their super, they probably would use the money right now.
100%. I think that was tested in COVID, right? Where you could take, 20 grand out. I think it was 10 grand in each sort of financial year. A lot of people, won't tell the government this, but they'll tell you in a pub or something like that they took it out simply because they wanted the 10 grand. And a lot of that money, I think there was a stat, don't quote me on this, but it was something like, I think it was like over 50% of that money, went towards gambling, going out, entertainment purposes, which was, again, not the point of it during that period of time. But I think that was, again, a really good litmus test to be like, people are generally quite poor at saving for their retirement in general.
And I find that a lot of people that I've spoken to that did take that money out during COVID regret it as well, because as Alex said, like, people purchase cars with it, purchase toys, like they didn't actually use it for the purpose that the government did that for. So, I know a lot of people have actually regretted pulling that money out. And obviously the government gave you the chance to put it back in, but I doubt many people actually did.
How do you get your friends, your clients to care about something that is so far out in the future that we can barely sort of comprehend it?
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult conversation, but it's definitely like a conversation that a lot of like 20-year-olds that come to see us, they're like, why should I care about my super? I can't touch it for 40 years kind of thing. And it's, again, as Alex said before, it's going to be your biggest asset in retirement. And it's like, well, a lot of people do want to have a fun retirement. They don't want to be necessarily living off the age pension, and they don't want to rely on the government to fund their retirement. So making a few small changes now could mean that, you do have that awesome retirement where you see those people, they caravan around Australia or they go to Europe twice a year. And a lot of people see that in their future and do want to work towards that. So, it is going to be one of your biggest assets. So we may as well care about it now and make a few changes now to maximise it as much as we can.
And I guess on a practical level, how we get people to care is visually. So, a lot of the work, when you come to see us is we sort of show how your super is projecting between now and retirement. And then if we make these changes, how much more you can potentially have, which often for, again, someone in their 20s, 30s or 40s, you can add hundreds of thousands of dollars to that end balance simply by having it invested correctly and saving some money on fees. And that's normally when people sit up in their chair and go, oh, I'm going to care about this. Like that's a lot of money a lot of the time as well. So.
And even for like our clients in their 40s, 50s, like we will do those projections, but then we'll show them, like a lot of people spend way more in their first 10 years of retirement where they are healthy, they do have the ability to do these big overseas
ticking off the
trips.
bucket list.
Exactly. So like showing them, all right, like you can spend more in kind of those first 10 years. Naturally, as you do get older, you do spend less and less. So showing them that income tiering as well has been really helpful for clients where they're like, oh, great, we know that like those first 10 years of retirement are going to be awesome. Like, yeah, we can tick off all those big bucket list items.
Now, a lot of people listening to the podcast are already investing outside of super. Their employer's paying their super guarantee amount, but they're thinking about, should I add extra money to my super or should I just keep investing outside of super so I can be financially independent before retirement? How do you have those conversations with clients when there's so many things to balance up?
Yeah, so I like to link a lot of what we do to basically putting a puzzle together. So when you come to see us, you'll have a bunch of stuff that you typically want to do or you won't be fully sure necessarily. So we have all these puzzle pieces. So it's how do we sort of fit this together to effectively complete the picture. And you're right, it's a balancing act at the end of the day because investing money outside super, it's an accessibility perspective, right? So if you're investing outside super, you can have that money back effectively whenever you want. Whereas if you're putting it into your superannuation, again, it's a lot more strict in terms of being able to get access to that money, i.e., you've got to be of a certain age, retired, et cetera, et cetera. So you then need to link it back to, well, what are your goals or what's your lifestyle design? Because you might not want to work all the way to 65. You might want to try to retire or semi-retire at 50 as an example. Okay, so you're going to need an investment which is paying you some passive income that you have access to, right? So investing outside super or having something outside super in that example would make a lot of sense. But generally from a tax perspective, it's going to be worse, right? So superannuation is effectively the best tax structure you have available in this country currently. So if, again, your goal is, no, I just want to minimize my tax as much as possible and I'm happy to work my entire career through to I'm able to access that in my 60s, then superannuation is potentially a better way to go. How it often goes in practice is, again, like you said, a balancing act. So making sure you have something outside, generally first, I think is the most important thing. So you put that first. And then once you know you're going to be able to tick that off, if you have extra money post that, then potentially salary sacrificing into super is going to be a better thing to do because, again, it's taxed at a lower rate as well.
Yeah, because I find that's a lot of the pushback is also the government's going to keep changing the goalposts. They're going to push back retirement age. They're going to change the tax environment of super. And so maybe I should just stay in control of my investment dollars. Yes,
and that's a great point, particularly for a younger person, so someone in their 20s, 30s or 40s, is there's that legislation risk. I think it's on average, again, don't quote me on this, but I think it's every 3 years on average they've made some sort of change to superannuation, and I would definitely expect that to continue in the future. There's so much money in there now, right?
Which is what they wanted in the first place. And
that's
now
right.
Yeah.
But now they're looking at it and going, geez, that's a lot of money. It'd be great if we could tax that a bit more, right? That's, sort of fill up the coffers in other areas. Because I think Australia, in terms of their personal rates, we're one of the top countries in the world in terms of what we're taxed personally. And as I said, there simply is just they're looking at it and there's so much money in there, they're going to be tempted to do something with that. So back to your point, again, you don't want to necessarily commit, a whole bunch of funds into something that, based on the rules today, particularly, if, your retirement age is sort of, 15 years plus, because there is going to be some sort of change. And that may be material. And like you said, it comes back to a control perspective and accessibility, right? So outside super, investing outside super, very accessible. You have full control, so a lot more flexibility. So when I talk to clients about it in terms of tax structures, generally the more flexible the tax structure, so how easy is it to put money in, how easy is it to get out, generally the higher rate of tax, right? Super fund, very inflexible. You can only put a certain amount of money in each year, and there's very strict rules when you can have that back. So very inflexible, but also then a very low tax rate as a result of that too.
With most of your clients, would they be doing both?
Yeah, generally. But again, I think it comes back to what you're ticking off. So back to that example I had before, that if you do want to have that part-time semi-retirement or something like that, it's making sure we can achieve that first, if that's the most important thing to you. And then if we have extra money or extra surplus after that, then superannuation is a great place to add extra money because you simply pay less tax right now.
But then some of our clients, they may not have a heap of surplus, but then we do show them the projections of super and they're like, oh, wow, that's way more than what I kind of projected I would have. So that gives them somewhat peace of mind as well. So they may kind of channel more of their surplus into those non-super investments from there.
Okay. I feel like the next natural question is, how much super should I have now and at retirement? Is there a magical number like $1 million or $2 million?
There's definitely not a magical number. I mean, a lot of it links back to the lifestyle you want to live in retirement. So some people are happy to like do all their travel while they're younger, have a pretty chill retirement, whereas some people, want to go and have a really extravagant retirement. So a lot of it links back to your lifestyle. There's no magical number. Like a lot of people come to us, I need $1 million in super by the time I'm 65, and we're like, great. Well, if you spend $200,000 a year, like that may not like necessarily be enough if you want to leave some to your kids as well. So it's really a personal thing, and it does link back a lot to their goals. Leaving a legacy to your kids, whether that's the family home or your super. But do I have enough is definitely a question that we get asked, especially when a lot of our younger clients have spent a lot of years studying where they haven't necessarily earned a whole lot, and now they're in like quite well-paying jobs. And it's again showing them those projections, which definitely do end up better than what most people think as well.
Something we use, and Days, quote me if I do this wrong, because I can't remember the exact name of the organisation, but it's ASF is the acronym, and effectively what they produce every year is what they consider a comfortable retirement for both a single person and a couple. And the good thing they do is they then relate that back to lifestyle, or like a relatable lifestyle. So, we consider a comfortable retirement, having health insurance, being able to pay all your bills. One of the things they do, which to me, I would probably want a little bit more in retirement, but everybody's different, is one overseas trip every 7 years. That to me is probably not quite enough, but and then like a domestic trip every year, being able to have Netflix subscriptions, being able to go to the movies. So there's a whole, it's quite a large comprehensive list. So that's a good sort of like, I think, starting point, because, as Daisy said before, there's no magical number. The media loves to put a headline like, if you got less than $1 million, you're stuffed kind of thing. But that's not necessarily true, again, depending on, what retirement looks like for yourself.
And it also can link back to, like you may not have a massive amount in super, but you may have $2 million in an investment portfolio outside of super. So, it's really understanding your net worth and how much income you can draw on that in retirement, rather than just concentrating on super, because a lot of people also do downsize their homes as well, and pull quite a bit of money out of that at retirement. So there's so many different factors that come into it. It's not just necessarily super is the be all and end all.
So I shouldn't be putting too much weight on those tables that say at the age of 30 you should have X amount in super.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's a good starting point, and like I'm not saying you shouldn't look at that necessarily, but comparison is the thief of all joy, as they say. And again, there's just so many other factors. Like, that's just a number. So don't pin yourself to that. And if you haven't hit that by 30, well, I'll just give up. I'm done, kind of thing, right? It may mean that if that is important to you,
because it might prompt you to take action.
That's right. You've got some work to do, possibly, right? So it gives you a guide. But I think, as Dave said there, like, you really got to look at your entire situation, because if you've only got 10 grand in super, but you've got a $10 million property portfolio outside of that at 30, you're probably doing all right, sort of thing. So that table really shouldn't mean anything to you in that situation. So I think it's a good starting point. But it's understanding that it's not necessarily the be all or end all. And you just take from that, okay, maybe there's some action I need to take. And as much as possible, it is looking forward, because the more time you have, the easier it will be to make some adjustments to improve that number, if that's something that's important to you.
When you're making projections for clients' retirement based off what they have now, there's that sort of nagging question at the back of people's mind, which is like, my $5 coffee when I retire might be $15 or $20. How do you factor inflation into this?
Yeah, so we discount it for inflation. So in all of our projections, we always have an inflation rate. We use 3% currently, which is obviously a little bit below the current inflation rate. But long term, the government aims to have inflation between 2 to 3%. That's effectively their mandate of monetary policy. So we always discount it back. So effectively, what that means is it's putting it into present value. So, the number that you may have in super might be $2.5 million in the next 40 years. But what is that actually worth today? It's 800,000 or 1.1 million. So we do the projections like that. So you can link it back to today. So you can think about, okay, well, what does 1.1 million buy me today? That's a fair bit of money. Okay, I'm going to be all right, sort of thing. Yeah.
And then, also linking it back to like a per annum spend where they're like, okay, I will have 90 grand a year in today's dollars to spend. That usually gives people a bit of peace of mind as well, rather than like just this big number. It's like, all right, if you live to what we expect your life expectancy to be, you will have, 100 grand a year to live on in today's dollars.
Yeah, and we always forecast it out to age 93 currently of life expectancy as well. So that's living above the current average too. So people can say, yep, got that number. This is how much I can draw down, but then between 65 and 93. But then discounted for inflation. So back to a number that's relevant today, i.e. I'll have 95 grand every year between those years going forward.
Because that's kind of the risk of sometimes using those online super calculators. They let you change every variable and you can change inflation to 0. And so suddenly you're getting numbers that might not be the best to make your plans off. Yeah,
you've got to be very, very careful. And this is a conversation I think broadly I have, when people come to see us as well, that sometimes people can get too focused on the projection, particularly if it is, because largely if it's more than sort of 5 years out or even 2 years out, like there's so many variables that can change. And like you said, there's so many numbers that we can change as well. So sometimes I joke to them, I can make it whatever you want it to be. You tell me I can just put in the inputs and I'm going to get it, right? So a lot of it's coming back to getting yourself on the right path, and then life will happen and you'll deviate from that a little bit. So you should review and then get yourself back onto the right path again. And if you do that a number of times, throughout your working career, generally speaking, things are going to work out okay as part of that. But I guess back to your comment then as well, like, you do have to be careful if you don't know what you're doing with those numbers, because you can largely produce anything, whether it's too low or too small. We as a general rule of thumb, use very conservative, like we use projections below the long-term averages on everything. We discount for inflation, as I said as well. So 9 times out of 10, we're showing someone something that they're going to have, which is going to be well below what they'll probably have in reality. Because again, we want to largely be conservative. So the further you're forecasting out, the more conservative you should be.
Yeah. All right. So what if someone has multiple super funds? Because many people over the last decade or two, they have ended up with multiple super funds, working different jobs, hospo, things like that. What is your advice there?
Yeah, we definitely do see that like people will just go with their default fund every time they change employer. So there's a few issues with having multiple funds. So majority of the time, you're paying kind of higher fees than what you need to. You don't have a consolidated investment strategy for your super as well. A lot of people that do have numerous super funds that haven't looked at kind of how they're invested or anything like that. There's definitely a few things you need to look at before you just jump on the ATO and consolidate them all into one. Like insurances in your super and things like that. So, you don't necessarily want to roll it all into one without taking all of that into consideration. But then on the flip side, you could also be paying for 4 different salary continuance policies through 4 different super funds that you wouldn't be able to claim on all 4 as well. There's definite issues with having kind of heaps of super funds, but before you consolidate them, it's definitely worth actually having a look at what each super fund contains in terms of insurances.
And that's the tricky part, isn't it? They've made it really easy to combine funds, but
which
almost too easy that you might not consider everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the MyGov thing is awesome for consolidating your super and actually seeing what you have, because so many people are like, I have absolutely no idea where all my super is. And we're like, jump into MyGov, have a look at it. And they're like,
it puts it right front and center.
Yeah, and then
I think it's got a money pig on top of it.
Yeah, and then it's like do you want to consolidate them all in the click of a button kind of thing? So that is great. But yeah, there's definitely some traps that you don't want to kind of fall into in terms mainly around the insurances.
Yeah. And even when you often open a new super fund, they'll do a check with your tax file number and they'll say, we've found that you've got another super fund. Do you want to just roll it over to us?
Yeah, which like you said, is handy because you don't necessarily want to have multiple funds, but also can be quite damaging from an insurance perspective if potentially, you've got some health history and now you can't apply for any more insurance, and that's something that you need to have at this point in time. So yeah, it can be a minefield. So you do need to be really careful and know what you're doing, and as much as possible sort of, look before you leap with these sorts of things.
Are there any helpful tools to compare? So if I had two different super funds and I wanted to know, let's take insurance out of the picture, and I wanted to know, which one should I keep? Or should I get a whole new one? What would you take into account there?
So what we do when you come to see us, when we're sort of analysing any super fund, because we don't work for any super fund, we don't care who we use at the end of the day. Broadly speaking, there's 4 bits of criteria we look at. So firstly, it's the fees, right? And this is really, I guess everyone knows what a fee is, right? But it's quite poorly understood how you accurately do this. So because often, super funds aren't necessarily the most transparent structures.
And they have like 3 different types of fees, and sometimes they're in $2 a month and sometimes they're in 10 cents per something.
Yeah, so often they'll be charging a flat dollar fee,
yeah,
and then they also charge a percentage fee. It's the percentage fee that you should care about more, because the dollar fee, as your balance grows, will become a smaller and smaller percentage of. The tricky thing is for the average person is to accurately figure out what your fees actually are, because a super fund will have different investment options below it. Again, something which is poorly understood, and that's actually where the fee is. So it's making sure that you understand that, say you're with Host Plus, you're in Host Plus option A. Okay, I now need to look at the fees for option A, not B, not Z, not anything else like that. So, and I guess what comes with that is, as you said, often there's not just one fee. Sometimes there can be up to 8. And unfortunately, the only accurate way to really do it is to go through all the PDS, supplement PDS and investment PDS, find all these fees, add them all up together, and then you can truly compare one cost of that fund to another. There is no, there's a few online tools out there and stuff like that. However, again, in our experience looking through it, they don't necessarily factor in all these things. They're not necessarily accurate enough. So unfortunately, the answer is it's a bit of a manual process if you want to do it correctly. And what complicates that even more is there's no legislation around what they can title the funds. So what I mean here is like a balanced fund, whilst, I would think a balance might have, 50% growth assets like shares or property, 50% cash. However, in the industry, that can range anywhere from 50-50 right up to 95-5, depending on...
I've seen some very creative interpretations of balanced.
That's right. In general, to be honest, they are normally about 75% growth, 25% defensive. So again, when people are comparing things, they might be looking at the Host Plus Balance Fund versus Rest's Balance Fund, and they're like, look, Host Plus Balance Fund from a performance perspective has done so much better than Rest, without understanding that potentially it was an up market. So, share market was trending up that year. So Host Plus did really well because they actually had a 75-25, whereas Rest might have had a true sort of 50-50, in which case it's more conservative. So it would say hypothetically perform better in a down market. So they're not really comparing an apple with an apple, I guess is what I'm getting at here.
Yeah. It's so challenging for consumers though. We're forced to use superannuation, and then it's created so complexly that it's hard to understand and compare.
Yeah. And the government's done a good job with the APRA heat map test. Well, they've done a good intention, should I say? And it is making people more aware of how their funds are performing. I guess me being nitpicky, and obviously we work in this industry, is that, comparing a high growth fund, year on year is not an accurate way to do it. It should be over sort of a 7-year plus period, as an example. And also within this APRA heat map test as well, not all funds have to play as well necessarily. They can choose not to play, which again doesn't necessarily make it a true comparison. So it's a good starting point. It's a good prompter, like all these things, as we sort of mentioned before, like, looking at what your balance should be at your current age. It's a good prompter. It's a good starting point. But again, don't take it as gospel.
What about the ethical super options that are popping up? Because more and more people are sort of asking questions about those. Do they have a criteria, or can anything sort of have that label?
Yeah, so ethical super funds have definitely become more popular, I'd say, in the last kind of 5 years or so. It's definitely a question that we get quite a bit. So, they have to have like an ESG charter and things like that. So when we're having conversations about ethical super funds, a lot of people do come to us and they're like, I want to invest ethically. And then we actually send them the fund's ethical charter and we're like, have a look at what they do and don't restrict. A lot of them say like if 5% or more of a company's profit is from like gambling, for example, we exclude that. And a lot of people kind of come back and they're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that like these mining companies would be in this ethical portfolio, but because they don't necessarily like are restricted from these percentages that a lot of the ethical funds do, people are like, oh, okay, do I actually want to pay an additional amount when it doesn't necessarily align with my ethical values as well? So with all of our clients, when you come on board with us, we will discuss your ethical preferences and what you do and don't want to avoid. Some people just feel quite neutral about it. They're like, I don't really mind. We will show you the different options of an ethical super compared to just a standard super fund as such, and then show you the ethical charter, and then you can make up your mind from there which route you want to take. With super, the ethical side of things is much more restricted than investing ethically non-super wise. So there's so many options ethically if you do want to invest outside of super. But in super, they are a bit more restricted and there's not as many options in the market as yet.
And the fees are typically quite a bit higher as well. So the spread of fees outside super is...
Same with ETFs and managed funds in that space.
That's right. Yeah, that's 100%. So outside super, you said more ethical options. The fees are much, much, much more reasonable, in my opinion. Inside super, still plenty of ethical options, but generally a little bit more restricted, and generally there is quite a difference in fees. So you will pay a premium for that.
Yeah.
Which at the end of the day, if that's your ethical choice, like you want to invest this way, then the fee really shouldn't matter per se. However, we do obviously show that to the client, the difference between, say, investing with ethical fund A versus more stock standard fund B, and then the impact that would have to your end retirement balance as well.
Because a lot of people also do believe, or they come to us and they're like, oh, we think the ethical companies will perform better like over the long term. And we're like, yeah, that's great. But like we can't factor that into our projections and say like, oh yeah, we believe it's going to do 2% better over the long term. So a lot of people do come to us and say that as well. But when they actually get linked back to what these ethical companies are actually investing in, they're like, oh, okay, maybe I'll just go down the standard route instead.
Now, whenever you're choosing a super fund, they'll tell you to read all their documents. They'll tell you to read the product disclosure statement. I don't know many young people that have actually spent time, apart from myself, because I'm a bit of a nerd, reading through product disclosure statements. If someone was just going to open it and look at a few important things, where would you direct their attention?
Yeah, so I think firstly, the fees is probably the most important thing. I know we've already talked a fair bit about it.
They usually give you an example as well.
They do, right? Which is good. So it's a lot better than what it used to be, in years gone by, and I think it's a lot clearer. But yeah, I think that's probably where I would go to begin with, the first thing. And then because it's understanding that most super funds invest in pretty similar things, right? So if they're kind of all investing in similar things, they should in theory over the longer term get relatively similar returns, which then makes the fees material and matter. Because if Fund A is 3 times more expensive than Fund B and they're just investing in the same things, really you want to be with Fund B, right? Because it's a third of the cost. And being in that cheaper fund for effectively the same product, it's guaranteed as well. As Daisy was sort of saying before, when people sometimes come to see us, they're like, I think the ethical fund's going to invest better than the stock standard fund over the long term. Okay, you're very, very entitled to that opinion, and we can action that based on that belief. However, there is no guarantee in that, right? Whereas if you're comparing the fees and it's a like-for-like product and one is half the price, well, that is locked in and that's guaranteed. So I think looking at that, familiarising yourself with the types of fees that are charged, because it's not just one fee. Often there's multiple as well. So just getting yourself used to that sort of terminology, I think, is a really good starting point.
just to add on to that as well, like in the PDS, they normally have a list of investment options showing you kind of, how you can invest your money within that specific super fund. So I think for me, like if I was to open a PDS, not necessarily having to read every page, but having a look at the fees and then having a look at the investment options is probably the two most important. And most PDSs do lay it out fairly nicely with a table that will show you all the investment options and the fees associated with those as well.
They're supposed to make it clear.
It's a lot, to be fair, it's a lot better than what it used to be. It's a lot more easy for, the layman to read it, I think, these days. But yeah, most people just don't read. I mean, why would you? It's boring, right?
Yeah. All right. What about growing our super balance? What options do listeners have there? What are the different ways that we can think about adding more to our super?
There's definitely the options of making additional contributions. So whether that's salary sacrifice, personal.
So that's where you ask your employer to do it?
Yes. So this is where you'll go to payroll and say, hey, can you please keep $100 and put it into my super fund each fortnight? So that would reduce how much personal tax you're paying. You also can, like if you have, say, 10 grand in your bank account, you can put that into super and claim a tax deduction for it. There's so many different ways you can add into your super. You can do like non-concessional contributions where you can't claim a tax deduction for them. They all definitely have different limits. So the government is kind of constantly moving those limits a little bit as well. But if you don't have a massive surplus where you can't afford to salary sacrifice and things like that, it does link back to, as Alex said, like the fees and making sure you are invested appropriately. That can definitely grow your super balance at a greater rate, as well as looking at consolidating them and making sure that, you do have one investment strategy moving forward. So, there's two different options. Either, you can do the additional contributions, or you can have a look at, all right, how can I save fees and grow my super balance in that way as well.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, we keep sort of saying, making sure you're appropriately invested. So what we're sort of talking about there effectively is when you're doing any investment, it's always thinking about the time frame. So the time frame is how long until you want the money back. Now, if someone's in their 20s, 30s, 40s, or even 50s, that time frame before you can access your super fund is going to be longer than 10 years. And historically speaking, from an asset allocation point of view, or where should I invest my money, shares and property have always outperformed an asset, say like cash, which they consider a defensive asset once you sort of go past that 10-year period. Now, when you open your super fund, if you don't select an investment option, they'll select one for you. And generally, they'll put you into what they call their default fund, which is often a balanced super fund. Now, as we've established before, balance doesn't always mean 50-50.
Got a wide range.
Got a wide range, but generally it's like 75-25, which is not considered a high growth portfolio. So if someone's in their 20s, 30s, or 40s, because of that time frame, again, you need to do your own due diligence and think about your own risk tolerance, which I'm not going to go into at this point in time because we'll be here all day. But generally speaking, a higher growth portfolio is going to be more appropriate because you have so long for that money to be invested. Therefore, you want to put it in the best place to make as much money as possible. So simply making that change may give you an extra sort of 2% on your return on average over that sort of investment time frame, which can literally add hundreds of thousands of dollars to your end balance simply by making that switch. But a lot of people they don't look at it, they leave it their whole life, and then they miss out on a lot of value, that's something you can do without having to add extra, because as Daisy said, you may not be in the position where you can add extra money to your super fund. It's just, being smart with getting the fees right and getting the investment right.
So we've covered a lot of different things today about super, and it might feel like a lot for people because we've talked about comparing fees, looking at insurances, looking at different ways we can top up our super. When should we consider getting advice about our super?
I don't necessarily think you're ever too early to receive advice on super because, as somebody who's an employee, you may finish uni, kind of hit your first job or proper job, and then you're like, okay, well, there is quite a bit of money going into super each year. You just want to make sure that it is appropriate. I don't necessarily think you're ever too early to seek advice on super. And kind of as we've harped on a little bit, but making those few changes younger can make such a massive impact to your long term, where we see a lot of people that kind of care about their super when they're closer to retirement and they have to start salary sacrificing or making massive contributions to super and giving up their lifestyle at that point. So I don't necessarily think you're too late, but it's just understanding that you have to give up so much more at that point. So a lot of our clients that come to see us are in kind of their late 20s, early 30s, and caring about their super then will have a dramatic impact on their long-term retirement as well.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, I think it's not so much about obviously the earlier the better is great, but there's multiple times throughout your life when you probably should check in on it as well. One of those being sort of the sooner the better to get it set up correctly. But then as we've talked about, as your life changes, potentially you have more money, so there's contribution strategies, and then sort of the pre-retirement, you want to really make sure that, again, you've ticked all the boxes, got all your ducks in a row. And then there's also the retirement as well. So it's a constant evolving thing and something that you should check in throughout your entire life, I think, is a really good idea. And making sure, basically the sooner you do it and you get into that rhythm of understanding it and reviewing it from time to time, the more money you'll simply have, the more options you'll have in retirement.
Perfect way to end today's episode. Well, thank you both so much for coming on the show today to talk about superannuation. I'll put a link to Everest Wealth if anyone wants to get in touch with you guys to chat about super, because you do this all day long and you love having a chat about super. So you'll get right into it.
We certainly will. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.